Hello, everyone. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I am so excited and thrilled today to be interviewing an extraordinary and talented comedian, Lana Turner, who not only is, hello, Lana, thank you for coming on.
Hello.
Not only is a comedian, but an actress, a guitar player, and I think you have the record for writing the quickest song in the world. Just like several minutes before you get on, I was looking in your bio. They said that you wrote a song very quickly before you got on stage when you were first getting started.
Oh, like right before I walked on stage?
Well, you were in the car. You
Oh,
were,
I wrote a song in the car before probably.
yeah, you did
Sometimes
that.
the best songs are the ones that come out of you really quick. And then there's those ones that you have to take a long time to write. Those are good too, but it's weird how that works.
Well, it is when inspiration comes to you. Sometimes it comes to me in the shower or when I'm thinking. Sometimes I'll babble at night when I think about stuff, and people say, "What are you talking about?" I'm just talking to myself, and it's okay to talk to yourself as long as you don't answer yourself.
Right? You hear the answer and have a whole conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes. Yeah,
So
sometimes.
everyone, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I really want to get to it with Lana's interview. Lana, I know you were born in Canada in 1975, moved to Texas, and you've always wanted to be a comedian.
Not well. I always thought it'd be cool to be a comedian, but I never thought it was. It was one of those things as a little girl that didn't really occur to me that it was even possible to do stand up. I was a huge comedy fan, um, but it wasn't until I started playing songs and somebody suggested, "Hey, why don't you go to the open mic?" I was like, "Oh, that's a neat idea." Like I used to go to the club all the time and watch comedy, but back when I started, there were very few women, and now there's a lot of women, but still not nearly as many as men. And so um, it was like it just didn't occur to me that it was even possible, which is really sad. But yeah, once I started, I just there wasn't much else that I ever wanted to do.
Well, tell our people what open mic night is. I mean, in the comedy world, they know it, but open mic is when amateurs get up and they just take a shot at comedy.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter if who you are as a comic. Like if you're Jerry Seinfeld or Dave Chappelle, everybody starts their first time at an open mic, and you stay there for a long time, just trying out stuff and figuring out who you are on stage. And it really is that whole 10,000 hours of just putting in time, and that's where everyone starts. And it's fun and it's awful and it's torture and but it's I liked it, but I mean you dread it too. There's I gotta wait around all night and put my name on a list. And
Well, when was your first aha moment when you said, I can do this, I can make a living at it?
I have my exact moment. I started working as a comic very early. So when we talk about open mic, most people spend a lot more time at open mic. But because I walked in my first time with a guitar, and because I was one of very few women back then, I just really stood out. And I had a lot of material quickly because of the songs. So within about 2 months of my open mic, I got my first booked spot at the club in Houston. And at the end, I walked off stage, and the manager was standing right next to the exit point, and he placed $20 in my hand. And I looked at my hand, and I said, "What is this for?" Like, I didn't understand. He's like, "I'm paying you for your spot." And I went, "Oh," and that was it.
Oh
I
my
was like, if I
God, I
can
can
get
make
paid,
money. Yeah,
yeah, if I
that's
can
when
make
it occurred to
20,
you.
yeah, it was like $20 for what. But then, of course, like, you don't make that much money doing comedy for a very long time, and still sometimes you're still like doing a lot of free shows, but you gotta love it, and that's the key to think to anything in life is if you love it, you're happy whether you're getting paid or not. But knowing that I could make money doing it meant that this was something that I could pursue and do full time. I, I I can tell you that as a singer songwriter playing music outside the world of comedy, it didn't seem like it was as easy. Actually, comedy seemed a little easier in that way because there was a lot more opportunity to get booked and make money.
Well, people connect with music easily. And when you're just doing comedy, that's one side of it. When you're doing the comedy and the music, that's another dimension that a lot of comics don't have.
Well, a lot of comics, like purist comics, probably don't love a guitar on the show because it's hard. It's hard to follow that energy. Um, but it took me a long time because I started out just writing songs to actually learn how to do the monology and just the talking out of jokes. So there was a period of time many years ago when I had to set the guitar down and walk out on stage and not rely on the music and just learn how to be just a comedian. And because that part took a little bit more for me, it wasn't quite as natural as just writing a song.
It's well, what you say is very important, whether it's comedy or something else. I've had other interviews, and I always say follow your dreams. When you start believing you can't do it, nothing will ever happen. But you have to be willing to make that step and say, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to devote 100% of my time in it.
Yeah, and I mean, look, I tell my kids all the time, like, figure out what makes you happy and then pursue it. And I think if you're pursuing something just for the love of money, that you might struggle to find happiness in that. And of course, you need finance to survive in life, but it depends on how much you actually need. I didn't make a choice to get into comedy because I thought I'm going to make a ton of money doing this. I just wanted to do what made me feel good because we're not here that long. I had the fortunate misfortune of getting into a really big car accident about a year before I started comedy. And that taught me that, I mean, I might not be here tomorrow, so I better enjoy the time while I'm here, you know?
Well, there's a great song by the Righteous Brothers. If you believe in forever, then life is just a one night stand.
Oh,
And that's really it. I mean, life
yeah.
was just here for a short period of time. To us, it may seem long if you live to 100, but in the overall scheme of things, life is a one night stand in many ways, and take advantage of it, right?
Yeah, that's such a bummer conversation about comedy.
Well, it might be a good comedy routine. Now, was your first open really the gig at the Laugh Shop in Houston, Texas? Was that where you started?
It was the Laugh Stop, and yeah, Laugh Stop. It's no longer there, but yeah, they had an amazing open mic. But my first time, like, because I was female and I had a guitar, and there's a lot of like older comics that weren't really supportive of new comics coming in. It was super awkward when I walked on stage. Nobody thought I was going to do well, and I had an amazing first time on stage because everybody thought, oh, this is going to suck, and it didn't. So that was kind of cool. But it was the Houston Laugh Stop, and it was an awesome club to start in.
But you bring up another good point, Lana, and that is when people don't think you can do something, then you can do it.
Well, there's a lot of things people don't that I can't do.
No, but I mean, when people say that you can't do something, then you can do it, right?
Well, yeah, you know what? Sometimes when people tell you you can't, it makes you fight even harder so that you can, to your own maybe disservice. But I mean, even to this day, sometimes my mom's like, "Oh, baby, you should, you could still go and do other things." And I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" Because it's such a weird decision. But
Well, but the question is, do you really want to do other things? I mean, in my life, I love being a lawyer. That's my day job, and I just really love it. But
yeah,
I can't imagine doing anything else. Now, if somebody asked me what's your alternate career, it would be a talk show host. So I thought, why not just get a YouTube channel and ask people to come on and talk to them?
just do it, right?
Just
Yeah,
do it.
that's inspirational. And I think you can wear many hats in your life. Like, I never thought I was going to be a mom, but here I am. I'm raising two kids too. Actually, that's really become my first job in the world. Until they're out on their own, I can't be free to just run all over and do comedy because that means I have to leave them, and I can't do that. So it's a little, life comes up and things ebb and flow, but I will never stop doing comedy. I was going to say I never not do comedy. That's a double whatever, but I'm going to
Well,
continue with it always. And I love it. It's fun.
what many people don't realize about comedy, it's one thing to sit around and tell jokes, but another thing to go in front of an audience and be funny. Two different things. Oh, I can do that. They see Seinfeld. They'll see you on there. They'll see, your deceased husband, Ralphie May. I can do that. but it's a totally different environment. It's a much more vicious audience, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I think that's why you spend a lot of time at open mics, because over many years you learn how to take whatever you were doing, that water cooler humor or whatever, and whatever you made somebody laugh at a table. You got to figure, okay, that was funny in to that person, but how do I make it funny to a room of people? And but I mean, I think that that's what the challenge is figuring that out, and then you got to tweak it and keep working it, and then maybe you'll do something in front of one crowd and they'll love it, and then you'll do it in front of another crowd and it doesn't work, and you're like, why didn't it work? And then you gotta, it's there's a lot of practice and trial and error that goes into it.
Well, I speak a lot on how to speak, how to give presentations. And one of the things I tell people is you got to be funny and you got to tell a story. And that's what comedy is. Do you feel that you can communicate sometimes more effectively with comedy than you can if you just talk to somebody?
Like just in life, or
Well, in general, because for example, I've seen a lot of Ralphie May's um, routines, and I've seen yours, and he'll make some really what I think are important social statements, and they're funny, but they stick with you, like the $97 salad, and other things he talks about.
yeah, I mean, I think having an opinion on stage as a comic is incredible, and can change. Like, you can change the way people feel about things through laughter and through jokes, right? Um, but I don't know if it's essential, like in life, to just be funny to communicate. I think there's a lot of unfunny communication that takes place that's really important. Where, I mean, maybe there's humor within those niches that we just don't get, right? Like coding humor, right? Like there might be some, like, you know,
Well, obviously, you don't want to be funny during a tragedy, but when you're trying to
well,
teach somebody, but even then, I've seen some hysterical obituaries where
yeah, I
people,
was going to say, I think that there's, with tragedy, there's, they always say, if has there been enough time, right? Like, when can you start making fun of something tragic? And that there's always an art to that. People are ready to start laughing about the things that cause them pain, because the laughter helps you work through the pain of whatever you're going through. And sometimes hitting that nail on the head is exactly what you needed to just bust that open and release it. So,
well,
yeah,
there's
I
a speaker named, I mean, a teacher named John uh, Colin James, who says using comedy to be a better speaker. And one of the things is he says you got 11 things. One, lighten the mood. And isn't that what you have to do when you start? Lighten the mood. You have to read the audience and sometimes adapt your presentation and your routine based on what the audience you have.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's going to be certain crowds when you get in front of them that they're like, they're not going to probably like this quite as blue, or they might really like it blue. And the only way sometimes is to do something and be like, okay, that one didn't work so well. But it's really important, I think, in public speaking or whatever, is just to how you present yourself in the first couple of seconds when you walk on stage, and making sure that the audience is confident that you have the ability to bring them through whatever they're going to go through. So walking up and knowing that you're confident up there, and maybe the first few things you say makes them feel at ease, and then you can bring them into you, is
It's that
definitely an
it's that
important.
way with public speaking. When you're doing a presentation, you only have 30 seconds to a minute to connect. Is it the same way in comedy? You've only got a short
Yeah,
time.
I think it's even shorter. I think the audience is judging you the moment they say your name. Sometimes the way somebody introduces you affects the first few minutes of your set, or can affect your entire set. If somebody gives you a really bad introduction, you'd be like, oh, really? Like, now I have to dig my way out of that. Which doesn't happen very often, but every now and then you're like, okay.
Well, Colin James also says the best comedians are masters of telling the truth about the human condition. We laugh because we all experience that. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, when you say the best comedians, I think there's a lot of different kinds of comedy. Like, I don't want to disagree with him, because I understand what he's saying. But I think that there's, just like music, you have country music, you have rock and roll, you have music that's just frivolous, made for children, that has very little meaning, and it has its audience. And that's a wonderful thing because that's what it's designed for. It's designed to entertain an audience. So there's some comedians that talk about absolutely nothing that are so funny. And then there's some comics that I'm not into, but somebody else absolutely loves. And there's a flavor for everything. So like, that's why some people absolutely love a comic like Jeff Dunham, who's doing ventriloquist type stuff. And other people are really into like one of my favorite. I love Doug Stanhope. You might not know who he is, but he's super offensive and really speaks from what he's feeling. And I mean, hilarious. So I mean, and I can respect all of it, but I don't know that that everybody's speaking to the hearts of. I don't know. Maybe the puppets are speaking to the heart. I don't know, but I think there's something for everyone, and it just depends on what someone's into.
And that's why you have to adapt to your audience.
Yeah, or the audience finds you, and that's your audience.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
those are the people who are going to come to see you all the time.
Yeah, and somebody who does have a strong opinion can be polarizing, and I mean, and when you're a comic, you have to have a pretty thick skin, and I think in general most comics are really fragile. So I mean, every negative comment that you get, you're like, oh, that hurts, because you want everyone to like what you're doing, but nobody is ever gonna like, and you're never gonna have everybody like what you're doing. It's just impossible. So you just got to roll with the punches, and so like I said, like when somebody is known for their work, it's wonderful because their audience is built in. So when somebody's famous, they automatically have a fan base of people who already know what they're in for and are super excited to be there. That's a great place to be in when you're a comic.
Well,
Or a speaker, public speaker too. Same thing, right?
Well, it's also about telling a story. So when you're getting ready to do, you're planning a routine, do you say this is a theme that night? Do you just roll with it? Do you go back to things you've done in the past and say this is what I'm going to do? Because I know you do a lot of improv too.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit of both. I kind of have my set act that I've worked on, and I like until I record it, then I'll keep building on that act, and it's a bunch of building blocks of different bits and songs that I can put into a set. And sometimes I'll deviate and go a different direction because I know that something else would be working better in this moment. But in general, I kind of know where I'm going before I even walk on stage. Um, so yeah, but I mean, I tend to like to tell a story that's a little bit cohesive and talk about things in my life. But there's some amazing comics that just do one-liners, right? Like Stephen Wright, or I don't know if you remember Mitch Hedberg. I mean, just the afterthought, one thought after another, and it just takes you on a different journey, but not necessarily one cohesive story. And it's hilarious.
Well, the old Henny Youngman, Jack Benny, all those guys,
Jokes, right?
they were all just one joke after another.
Mm-hmm.
And Milton Berle and all his one-liners.
So funny.
Yeah.
Those guys, I got to see, when I first moved to LA, there was a Friars Club here. It's no longer here, which is a bummer, but I got to go and see all those old guys. I got to see them before they passed, a lot of them. And oh my gosh, Milton Berle was hilarious.
Well, George Burns was funny too in his kind of
So
deadpan way. I mean, and there are some comics that are so emotional. Some are just looking at you like this. And one of my favorite comics was Foster Brooks because he always played the drunk guy, and he did that so well. Foster Brooks used to appear on Dean Martin quite a bit, and if you ever see the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast, you can YouTube that. He is hysterical. He just played a drunk. That was his whole routine. Every routine, he was a drunk.
Last night I was driving home from a gig that was about 2 hours away, and I was listening on I just happened to know, like, this is such a coincidence we're talking about it today, because I just put on like old school comedy, and they were playing Dean Martin, and yeah, I haven't done that ever, so it's funny that we're talking about that today, because I was listening to a bunch of those guys last night on my drive. So.
Yeah, it's there've been a lot of incredible comics, and when we go back to talking about nothing, Seinfeld became famous talking about nothing.
Yeah, pretty much, and hilarious.
Yeah, he's funny, and I remember yada yada yada. Remember, yeah, and yada yada yada. And watching Elaine dancing, in her contortionist way. I used to be glued to the to TV when Seinfeld came on. And in terms of your material, I mean, you obviously draw from a lot of things, but what inspires you most about, when you say, God, I'm going to talk about this tonight?
Well, for me personally, I felt like I had a big burst in my ability to relate to other people and to have something of more depth to talk about when my life fell apart. Like when stuff really got tough for me is when I found a lot of comedy came out of that. And that's where I think that tragedy plus time equals comedy. Um, that which is sad, but true.
Well, I think you think the comedy though takes away some of the hurt or some of the frustration you're going because it allows you an opportunity to air it, to get it out of your system in some ways, vent it, and then
Mm-hmm.
laugh about it.
Yeah, it's therapy. And it's approval too. I mean, you go on stage in front of a room full of people and you can tell them about something that happened and then they laugh. It feels good. It's a relationship. And so I'm hoping to make people feel good. And in turn, I get a compliment too, which is lovely.
You mentioned something about preparation, the 10,000 hours, and one of the tips for being a great comic is to be prepared.
Yeah.
Is I mean, there are those that do improv, but being prepared is, you know, or he'll say you get booed off stage if you're not prepared.
Well, I think even improv, I mean, the people who are really good at that have been doing it for a very long time. So it's not quite as improv as you might think because they've encountered those scenarios before. But I mean, getting a bad reaction from an audience, it really hurts and it's not fun to go through, but you have to do that to get good. I mean, you won't ever meet a comic that didn't have bad sets to get to a place where they're good. And even some of the best comics can still have a bad night.
Um, there's yeah, you're gonna have a bad night. Um, there's never the perfect speech. I don't think there's ever the perfect comedy routine because I think you leave the stage and you think, oh my God, I could have talked about this or I should have talked about
What could
this
have I done?
or
Yeah.
this might have been funnier. I think sometimes we're our worst critics when it comes to that.
Yeah. I would just agree.
Huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty much.
We look at, but a fear and self doubt is a good thing because it helps you get motivated. I wrote a small section on arrogance is your pathway to failure. Because when you believe that you are the best at anything, then you're going to fall. But if you always have a little self doubt, you always have a little fear, which is good, then you're always going to do well.
It's true. I'm sure. I mean, yeah, I guess when somebody gets super arrogant, the only thing that can happen is the world could tear you down at some point. Although I think there are some people who are really, really, really on top, and it's hard to imagine. But life is a leveling force, right? There's always something. I always wonder if you can ever really have everything. Like if you can have all those plates in the air at the same time and have them all really like spinning, Can you really have everything you've ever dreamed of as a career and still have a perfect relationship and keep that balance? And because it's something suffers, it feels like, but
Nothing is perfect. I mean, you've only
yeah.
got 100% to give. And sometimes there are things that are going to take more than 100%. They take everything you have. And it's really a question, like in your case, dividing between being a mom and comedy. You've had to make certain choices to be with your kids. You're obviously a great and wonderful mother. And you're going to realize, well, it depends when I ask your kids, right? When you
I was
say
gonna
no to
say, I was gonna say, get the kids in here.
get the kid, they might disagree. I know.
They're pretty awesome. They'll know not to say anything bad because they'll have to deal with it later.
Yeah, they will have to deal with it later.
Yeah, we
Oh,
got
I can
this.
remember. I have kids that are older than yours, and my oldest son, who says, "Dad, now I know what you mean." When I tried to tell him stuff, and he said, "Oh, you don't know what you're talking about." Dad, I finally understand. So you can get to that point when your kids get older, and then some kids are just never ever going to understand.
Yeah, I mean, I have to appreciate what my parents have done. Like it's hard,
It is.
right?
It is hard. Yeah, it's hard raising kids. You look
Yeah,
back and think, "Oh my God, it was easier to raise kids at a certain time. It's now harder." Our kids are going to say, "Well, God, it was easier back then to raise kids," but there's never an easy time to raise a kid. So, are
yeah,
your kids good fuel for your comedy? I've
Yes.
seen some of your routines where you mention your kids. Yes.
Yes, they're like, yeah. Well, so I talk a lot about my personal life. I just talk about things that happen in my world, or I'll write a song about something that I I saw something, and I every now and then I'll post something from the news or something from that's out in the world that. But I
Hmm.
tend to more talk about like my kids, or like it's
Hmm.
like yeah.
Well, I view comedy really as and the art of communication to be the same thing. You're sending a message. Sometimes the message can be profound. Sometimes it's nothing, like Seinfeld, but it's still you're communicating with people.
Yeah, I mean, I think comedy is the core of a relationship too. Like if your partner is, I mean, I guess everyone has their own turn-ons with their partner, but for me, it's if you're funny, that's going to be the greatest aphrodisiac of anything. Like if you can make somebody laugh, like I don't know, I think that's the most important thing. Is just
You know,
communicating one on one with somebody else.
it's funny you say that because when I've met people, I said, "Well, what attracted you to your spouse?" He was so funny, or she was funny.
Hmm.
It's just people. I think deep down inside want to laugh and want to be entertained. Now, you go from one extreme to the other. When you're in comedy, you're expected to make them laugh. But when you do something more technical, say when I'm doing a legal presentation, I still want to make them laugh. I still say I want them to enjoy. So in that sense, we are all entertainers. That unless we can glue their attention to what we're saying, they're going to forget it, and we're never going to get our message across.
Maybe, yeah. It depends, I guess, on what you're talking about, but definitely, like, yeah. I mean, I imagine there's some very serious topics that, like, you got to be really careful if you're joking around. Like, I don't
Yeah,
know, somebody who develops missiles, let's say. I don't know, like humor in like the third world, and I don't know, but yeah. I just know that like when I met my husband, people often thought, oh, how did you end up with him? Like, or how did you guys find each other? And then people will gravitate because Ralphie was 800 pounds when I met him. And people will be, oh, she must have been a gold digger, or she must have been after money or whatever. No, Ralphie was 800 pounds and
and
broke,
broke.
like not a penny. In fact, just he couldn't even get a credit card. Like he was, and and he wasn't a famous touring comedian. He was working and bombing just like everyone else at the time. He was so funny and he was so sweet. And so that humor just made everything else fade away. And I just loved him. Um,
You said something very endearing in one of your interviews, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to interview you, and that is when you said, "I looked past the weight and I saw the person inside." Once you got to know him, then the weight didn't matter at that point. It may have mattered
yeah.
down the road for other reasons,
Yeah.
but when
As
you fell in love with him, you know, you look past that.
I did. As I got older and learned more about what he was going through and how it was affecting my life. I mean, we were together for 17 years, and um, I really wanted him to get well, and I tried. Um, but there was, I always, I used to believe that you should look to the inside because the inside is what really matters, which is true. But there's also the packaging, which can help explain some of what's going on in the inside that might not be obvious. That's what I learned as I got further along in life. But I can say this, like, as far as a relationship goes, laughter got me through so many hard times, and I loved him so much because his humor was amazing, and I making him laugh was a huge joy too. Like we just had a great banter back and forth. Before I met him, I was traveling. I went after college. I traveled around the world. Really, I went to not the world, but I went like to India and Israel and Jordan and Egypt and Nepal, and it was an amazing trip. And I met during my trip. I had a boyfriend for about 2 months of that time, and he was a very handsome Israeli guy, super smart, really good looking guy. We had a really good time together, but there was a language discrepancy, and we kind of could only do certain types of humor with each other because you can't have the intricacies of language. And so there were a lot of fart jokes, which I learned are universally funny. Fart
Yeah.
jokes are funny no matter where you are in the world. or what culture, but eventually you start going, all right, like this is not going to
It
work
gets
forever.
old.
Yeah, so unless we can communicate on a more intellectual level, like the fart jokes are great, but whatever, let's go on. So then meeting Ralphie after that was just like the perfect mix of, oh, he's so funny, but you know, he didn't have the athleticism of the other guy. Like
Well,
we had a really good time in other ways.
nobody's going to be perfect. What you saw in him were things that you loved about him. And then of course complications develop.
Mm.
Uh, but you can't really help anybody who doesn't want to be helped. At a certain point, you had to make the decision. Basically, enough is enough. But
Well,
getting to
I didn't really make the decision. It was
no,
kind of
he
made
did.
for me.
Yeah, I know he
Yeah,
did. He filed, but yeah,
but it was healthy for me.
yeah.
So just to give the backstory, he was. I mean, addictions change. We weren't going to go to the addiction part. We were sticking with the comedy, but the addictions change over time, and his addictions moved from really to everything, and so that made for a very difficult dismount at the end of our lives together. And that's where I say the weight, while he was this sweet, sweet, funny man, it was indicative of a much deeper issue, and it just was always there.
Well,
But
sometimes
comedy was.
people who are insecure use humor as a shield
Oh
to, to
yeah,
to protect themselves. The guy who's
yeah.
the class clown, and he's really hiding something, not deceitful hiding, but maybe hiding behind some hurt or something.
Well, comedy. I mean, I'll speak for myself too in this way. Like comics are damaged, messed up people. Like you're not gonna if somebody's getting on stage. Usually, there's like my best friends are all comics. I love comics and comedy, but like usually that you always hear comics are messed up. It's true. There's something going on that makes you want to get up on that stage, right?
That's like sometimes saying psychologist, or and I know every psychologist is going to say something. Why are you saying that, Rudy? Some people say, well, psychologists always have problems too.
All those wacky lawyers.
Wacky lawyers and goofy lawyers. I know they get it.
You know what?
Go ahead.
I
No, go
have to
ahead.
say, when we're talking about humor, um, unfortunately, I ended up spending a lot more time in courtrooms and such than I ever would have wanted to. But when the judges are funny and the lawyers are funny in their presentation, it's really cool to watch that go on.
Well, I do try to use humor quite a bit. Even when I talk on the most technical of subjects like differences between litigation and civil law and common law jurisdiction. Like I don't want to talk about that, okay? But I try to make it funny because I take what's my theme, how am I going to entertain, and what are they going to learn? And basically what's in it for them. So I think the most successful people who talk about who do comedy or who do presentations, say as I do, are successful because the audience feels like they got something from it. When you're standing on stage and you think it's all about me, like a motivational speaker, all he does is sell his book and I'm wonderful and this is what I've done, or the speaker who talks to somebody's heart and the person leaves, wow, I felt like he was talking to me. I feel the same way with comics. When I'm a big one of the reasons I love Ralphie is because he had a lot of social statements and he made them super funny. And you're laughing, but you're saying, my God, that's such a powerful message. And so I feel like he speaks to me, and some of your stuff really speaks to me because I love music. I can't sing to save my life. I can't play a musical instrument, but I admire the fact that you do. So I get something from that. I think that's really what makes you successful. Would you agree with that? I mean, the audience have to feel that they got something from you.
Yeah, I mean, I even like to make songs that might be a little bit political or talk about something that's going on at that particular time. And I mean, I wrote a couple of songs about COVID when that was going on. We were all stuck at home, so why not write a few songs and bring people some levity during that? Because
People wanna lighten the mood,
yeah,
even under the worst of circumstances. They want to lighten the mood, and that's why they do it. But getting to your story about the guy you dated and all you can tell were fart jokes. I mean, I know people. I've traveled to about 30 or 40 countries, So a lot of people I know are English is a second language. And when we're watching something that's UK, for example, from the United Kingdom, that's a comedy, I don't get it. When they're watching something here, we don't get it. For example, if I see something in a Mexican TV station, I get the joke because I grew up speaking Spanish all my life. Well, that's funny to me. But somebody
Right.
who just learned Spanish, huh? What do they mean by that? Um,
Yeah, you can't quite get the intricacies of the language, plus the cultural difference. I got to perform in London a couple of years ago, and that was a blast. They I had great shows, but if I said the words "fat American," the room would like fall apart. And I don't know if it was just because my accent is an American accent or whatever. I have a
mhm,
kind of a mix of
yeah.
Canadian, Mexican, Canadian. I'm sorry, Canadian, American, Texan, whatever. But saying "fat American" in London was like, ah, and I don't. I was like, is that like British with messed up teeth here? I don't know what the context was, but it just killed every single time. And it actually was one of those moments. I said something, and then like "fat American," and I just literally had to stop and was like, are they going to stop laughing? Because this is like so weird for me. Um, and then I performed in Finland, and that was super strange because they're the most appreciative audience, but they're not big laughers. They applaud when they like your joke, so they might like
They're very
softly laugh.
polite. They're very
Yeah,
polite.
very polite. So they're like, "Am I doing well?" And what's going on here? Oh no, no, you're doing good.
Well, humor is very geographical and situational. What's funny in Mexico wouldn't be funny in the States. What's funny in Finland wouldn't be funny. And because of the language issues, as you said, with the guy you dated, well, was that funny? I
Yeah,
don't know. What are you talking about? Oh, I don't mean that. Um,
he would say to me all the time, "You're huge," and I'd be like, "Huge? You're huge," and I go, "Well, huge isn't good," and he's like, "No, it means big. It means huge," and I'm like, "Okay, I get what you mean in the context, I think, but like that's kind of offensive." And even like the language barrier, I got amoebic dysentery when I was in India with him, and he went to the drugstore to get medication for amoebas. But amoeba in Hebrew means worm, apparently. So he got me anti-worm medication, and so I was taking that, and I got super sick because I wasn't killing any amoebas. That's a little
that's
side story
that's
about
lost in
language and
lost in
communication.
translation.
Yep.
Lost in translation. And so when he says huge, what that means in Hebrew is going to be something totally different. And
Yeah.
people will translate literally. Funny story is like when the word in Spanish, in English, embarrassed means you're embarrassed. We all know what that means. But in Spanish, you say soy embarazada, you're saying I'm pregnant. Estoy embarazada. So you could tell somebody, oh, I'm embarazada by this event, and you're saying I'm pregnant by this event. And so, yeah, you see a lot of funny stuff and people trying to interpret literally. So when he said you're huge, he probably meant to pay you a compliment, but
Yeah, no, he did. He totally did. Or like in college I took 2 years of sign language. Um and there's deaf jokes, and we had to learn deaf jokes, and there's certain things that they people would sign for each other, and you'd be like, "Oh," and most of it's just making fun of hearing people. That was
I
really
wonder
funny.
if
Like
hearing
the
people would be a
hearing
protected
person is
class.
stupid, and like they'll like you're like, "What?"
Here locally, in the news, they have people who do sign language, and they
Uh-huh.
had some guy who didn't really speak sign language, so he was saying stuff like pizza or whatever, and the
Oh
people who
no.
read sign are like, "What is this guy doing?" It was a complete disaster, a complete disaster.
That's
But
really, and but like deaf people, he's like getting away for like a really long time doing this gig. He doesn't know the language, but like the people who can't really complain are hard to communicate with their problems. They're like calling the station trying to say like this guy's what the news reports about pizza.
yeah, it's hysterical. How do you feel when you get the applause? When you see the
Oh,
applause, how does that make you feel?
Oh my
Obviously
gosh! I
good,
mean,
but describe the feeling.
yeah, yeah. It's I mean, look, I would say comedy is addictive. I know that if I haven't been on stage for a little while, I don't feel good because you
Hmm.
you need that feeling once you started getting it, and so yeah, I love the that feeling of making other people happy and getting that applause. It's wonderful. I think it's true to anything. Like when my kids come home with a picture that they drew at school and that approval that they get when I'm like, that's awesome, right? Like you need cheerleaders in your life, and having a room full of people saying that was fun, it makes you feel pretty good.
Well, mostly what I get are, oh, that was a great presentation, or gee, it was funny. A couple times I've gotten a standing ovation because it was
Nice.
super funny. When I did the jazz drumming in the Art of Persuasion. I did it twice, once through Zoom when the pandemic hit, and once I did it live in St. Louis. And we got standing ovations for that. Well, I assume they were standing on Zoom because we got a lot of compliments. But my goal is when I give any type of talk is to entertain. And I think speakers can learn a lot from comedians because it really is a difficult art to learn. I mean, my hat goes off to people like you who can do it well and be funny and still communicate and get the message across. And sometimes, even if there's no message, that's even good because at the end of the day, you're still entertaining. And what I try to do in my world is let me make it fun for them. I mean, you could, come one day to some of my legal presentations when they're in person, and you're going to want to poke your eye out with with an eye because you say, "Oh my God, Rudy, they're so boring." Where people just they're talking heads, and they don't entertain, and they just because think they're so smart. I think. Well, I have a couple final questions for you guys. I know you have to go pick up your kids, right? And that
Yeah.
is, how do you handle the heckler?
Oh my gosh. That's one of those things that you learn by just having it happen over time. Um, and again, it depends on the situation, right? Like I've always heard this, and I think it's true that there's nothing much worse than a super drunk woman who can't shut up. And that sounds really sexist, and it can be a man too, but there's something, it's very hard because you don't want to shut her down in a way that gets her super testy because she's already drunk. Um, Whereas a man, it's a little easier to demasculate a man in front of a room full of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. You want to be well. I
Yeah,
guess it
and it's
depends how
terrible that
vicious.
there's even that. As I'm saying that, I feel really bad because that's exactly what we don't want to be saying about our society. But that is a problem when you're in front of an audience. And I'll usually, I've learned over time, when I have that particular woman in the crowd, she just kind of wants to be included and validated as opposed to shut down. And if you can, like, treat her with enough kindness and understanding, usually she just wants to yell something out and like it, if you can bring that around to being part of the joke, then that can help make it easier and make it stop. But you'd be surprised how infrequent you get. Now I'm going to get heckled tonight. I'm going to go to Flappers in Burbank because I was like, it doesn't happen too much. I'm going to get heckled the whole time. But it can be really fun. Like sometimes there's great heckles. I've had people yell stuff out that I'm just like, that's really funny. Now, I don't want to encourage anyone to heckle. Don't heckle. It's
Okay, don't
typically
heckle you.
not going to be better than what the comic has to say. But every now and then you're like, that's fun banter. We can work with that.
You can integrate it into your comedy routine. I
It's
was
usually best.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because,
that's the
I mean, the
best way I
work,
think to mute them. Yeah.
every now and then, and not very often, but every now and then somebody will be so disruptive that if you're in a good club, the bouncer will come and remove that person from the audience. And that's unfortunate when that happens. And I never want somebody to have to leave. So I try and find a way to like work with them. But I mean, yeah, it just depends. And then if you're doing like a quick set and you have 8 minutes or something at the Laugh Factory and somebody's chewed up, 3 of your minutes, that sucks.
Yeah, that's what would really would suck. Believe it or not, in the legal world, you get hecklers too. You get
Really?
these, you get these know-it-alls, and who will think they know more than you, and some of them probably do. But if I'm there speaking it because I know something, and there's a way that I handle them too, and that's a subject for another discussion. Because one of the things that you worry about, well, that you deal with, is the big egos in the law field. Okay, and lawyers like can do nothing but talk about their cases, which is why I do these interviews, because it's fun. Sometimes to talk about things that isn't legal,
I guess
but
like it depends on what type of lawyer you are, but when you're charging by the hour, being a little long-winded is not a bad thing for yourself.
yeah, it's not good for the client, right?
Not good, but
Not good for the
hey,
client.
you're, you're
I asked
getting
you
paid to
before
be
we.
verbose.
Yeah, I know. Well, some lawyers charge by the word. Trust me, it seems like they charge by the word. I say that tongue in cheek, but Lana, I asked you before we started recording, how did you get your name? You,
Ah, that
it wasn't
not a
because your
funny
parents were
story,
friends with Lana
really.
Turner, huh? Say
That
that
it's
again.
not it's not that funny of a story. My parents liked the name Lana, and I have the last name Turner. They asked. I was born in a really small town in Canada, so my parents asked a couple of people, "Hey, do you know who Lana Turner was?" Well, she's an old actress, so they didn't know. But then I moved to LA. A lot of people obviously remember who she was, and so fortunately it's spelled different. I always say there's an H in Lana, so backwards it doesn't spell anal.
Yeah. Well, when I told my friends I'm going to interview comedian Lana Turner, well, she died. No, no, this Lana Turner's alive. And I would say, well, I thought
Different
she was a
one.
comedian. I thought she was a famous actress. Well, my name is Rodolfo Rivera, and I have no middle name, but people call me Rudy. So when I was born many years ago, uh, my father had named me Ishmael. When he came home, my mom said, "You go back and change that name. I don't care what you call him, Roberto, Rodolfo, whatever, but change that name. I don't like it." He went back to the registry, the birth where the birth records were kept, and the only name he remembered was Rodolfo. So I've been Rodolfo and Rudy ever since. That's how I got the name.
It's fitting. You're a Rudy.
I'm a Rudy, yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, when the Rudy movie came out, it was Rudy, Rudy. I said I was around before he was.
Aw, that's
I
funny.
want to direct everyone, by the way, subscribe if you enjoyed my interview, and I know you did. There's no one looking at this who would not have enjoyed uh, this conversation with Lana Turner, but her website is listed down there. Please go to her website. She is extremely funny, extremely talented. I'm grateful that you're on my show. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
subscribe to my channel. But Lana, just I tell my viewers to subscribe and follow your career.
Yeah. Please, by all means, like, go to my website or whatever platform you're interested in, whatever you're on. The most I'm on there too, most likely. So just go to Lana Turner, LAHHNA Turner TURNER, and you'll find me there.
Well, thank you so much, Lana. And again, please subscribe to my channel. You'll get many more great videos like this. Thank you
Awesome.
so much, Lana.